Chief Executive unveils new plan to make cities' housing more affordable. A mother gets more than 15 years in jail for child abuse in a case the judge describes as the worst of its kind. And EU leaders agree on a 3-point plan to deal with Europe's migrant crisis.
Good evening and welcome. As property prices continue to smash records, the government today has rolled out measures to try and make flats more affordable. One of the main proposals is a tax on vacant properties, and the chief executive also has grand plans for those who want to buy subsidized housing. Winnie Wong with our top story.
Just in time before her one-year anniversary as chief executive, Carrie Lam today wanted the public to know she's working hard to make Hong Kong a more livable city. Today, Lam announced 6 new measures. As expected, one of them is the so-called vacancy tax. It will be in the form of an extra 5% of the flat's price.
We consider this is an adequate measure. But of course, we keep an open mind. As you know, this bill will go through the Legislative Council.
It's mainly aimed at developers who deliberately hold off from selling their newly built units to wait for a more favorable market. Lam says the tax will only be for first-hand flats, which means it won't apply to individual sellers. Buildings with occupation permits that are at least a year old will be checked to see if there are units that have not been sold or rented out in 6 months. If there are, these flats will be considered vacant. Lam also confirmed the price of subsidized flats will be decoupled from the market rate. The discount in flats under the Green Form Subsidized Home Ownership Scheme will now be set at 10 percentage points lower than ordinary home ownership scheme flats. This means HOS flats are discounted at 48%, while for Green Forms it's a 58% discount. All this comes as local private housing prices break records once again. According to the latest numbers from the Rating and Valuation Department, the overall private housing index for May 2018 reached 382.6. That's an around 1.7% jump from April and a 14.6% increase year on year. This also marks the 26th consecutive month of price hikes. But Lam says despite all of today's new measures, the best way to curb housing prices is more land to build on.
Without land supply, even if I were to make the HOS flats even cheaper or free of charge, I just don't have a land to build these flats for the people.
Lam has also decided to turn about 450 flats on Ma Tau Wai Road and Chun Tin Street, currently being worked on by the Urban Renewal Authority, into starter homes for locals. Winnie Wong, TVB News.
The mother who left her 10-year-old daughter with severe brain damage has been jailed for more than 15 years. The father will spend more than 4 years behind bars. It's a case which the judge described as the worst of its kind, prompting him to call for a review of the maximum penalty for child neglect. Kana Chu has this report.
It's jail time for the parents. The jury earlier found them guilty of child neglect and perverting the course of justice. High Court Judge Kevin Zerva said 10-year-old Suki Ling is no doubt a victim of serious neglect and abuse. She was taken to the emergency ward in July 2015, suffering from malnutrition with thin limbs, bruises, bed sores, and multiple skin abrasions. The court heard that Mandy Wong and her husband Rocky Ling gave the hospital the impression their daughter was born prematurely with disabilities. They falsely claimed their daughter had anorexia nervosa and would play with her own excrement. The judge called the 42-year-old mother calculating, callous, and cold-hearted for the well-rehearsed and carefully thought-out lies she told. She was sentenced to 15 years and 3 months in prison for 1 count of child neglect and 2 counts of perverting the course of justice. The father was locked up for 4.5 years on 1 count of perverting the course of justice. The judge lamented it was hard to imagine a worse case and deemed it necessary to review the maximum penalty of 10 years in jail for child neglect. The judge noted the girl's future is grim, as doctors think it is unlikely she will recover from her severe brain damage, and said she probably won't live past 20. Speaking after the sentences were handed down, the police did not rule out the possibility of further action against the male defendant.
I will go back to the office to analysis or to see whether we need to take any further action.
That's as Secretary for Labor and Welfare La Chi-kwang pledged to prevent a repeat of this case by strengthening social work services at schools. Kana Chu, TVB News.
Deplorable and unacceptable. That's the government's response to a report on human trafficking by the U.S. State Department, which put Hong Kong on its watch list. A report noted the SAR government did devote sufficient resources to a written plan that's not been fully implemented. Local authorities strongly disagree with the Trafficking in Persons Report 2018. Besides a continued disregard of the government's efforts, the spokesman said criticisms are unfounded and unfair. The government says it's committed to fight human trafficking and protect foreign domestic helpers against exploitation.
Turning overseas, European leaders have reached an agreement on how to deal with their migrant crisis. The plan pressures EU member states to do their fair share with helping to resettle refugees.
After 9 hours of tense talks that began yesterday and didn't end until 5 this morning, European Union leaders finally agreed to a 3-point plan to deal with the pressures of migration. First, they agreed to share the burden of refugees arriving in the bloc, but only on a voluntary basis. Secondly, they agreed to create controlled centers inside the European Union to process asylum requests. And number 3, they agreed to share the responsibility of rescuing migrants at sea.
Una proposta che riteniamo assolutamente...
Voluntary or not, Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte said dividing up refugees evenly is their key demand, since the bulk of migrants are arriving on Italy's shores.
We have reached what we assumed that it has to be reached. There are statements about on voluntary basis, relocation on voluntary basis, and Dublin based on consensus.
But Hungary's Prime Minister stood firm on his anti-migrant stance.
The invasion should be stopped, and to stop the invasion means to have strong border control, and we do have that.
Taking a firmer position on limiting migration is the same pressure the German Chancellor faces at home. So Angela Merkel put a positive spin on agreeing to a win-win deal. Some leaders accuse others of turning migration into a political issue.
Because it's today more a political crisis than a humanitarian crisis. The figures dropped down 95%, and we make like it would be a terrible situation on the borders, which is not the case.
So we're talking about numbers that are perfectly manageable. We shouldn't get into a panic state of mind. We're investing a lot in Africa. Now member states need to do the same.
This comes as 35 Moroccan migrants arrived on a remote beach near the southern Spanish town of Tarifa. They all say they're under 18 years old, and it's a miracle they survived. From Morocco, they crossed the Strait of Gibraltar in this inflatable rubber boat.
And still to come on our show tonight, a man falls to his death in a fire at a housing estate in Western. Another needle reported on a KMB bus. And Bali Airport reopens after volcanic eruption disrupts flights, leaving thousands of passengers stranded.
Welcome back to TVB News. More than 100 people fled their homes this morning when a public housing unit caught fire in Western District. Firefighters are checking if that's how a man lost his life by jumping out of a window. Ami Leung reports.
Smoke was seen from the 41st floor at Kwun Nong Lau, which also blackened flats above. The fire alarmed residents even on the lower floors. More than 100 people left their homes as firefighters arrived to battle the blaze. 2 people required treatment after they fell ill. This man said he heard an explosion when the fire broke out at around 5 o'clock this morning. It was put out in less than an hour. This fireman said the block is not fitted with an automatic fire alarm system and they had to activate the system manually. An investigation is underway to see if there's anything suspicious about this case. That's as the team looked for clues at a nearby footbridge where a body was found. Authorities are trying to figure out if the deceased landed there after jumping from his flat. Naomi Long, TVB News.
Take a second look before sitting down. Another needle was discovered on a KMB bus this morning. The bus operator has already passed CCTV footage to the police. Christy Lung has more.
Police arrived at the Kwun Tong bus terminus after another reports of a needle on a KMB bus. A passenger on KMB route number 17 towards Kwun Tong complained of a needle hooked to his trousers. Officers took statements from the bus captain and checked the interior of the vehicle. However, they couldn't find any sign of seats pierced by needles. Still, it's enough to scare passengers. I don't dare to sit down after the incident, said this lady. This woman thinks it's a selfish act. To allay public worries, Jackie Kwok, chairman of the KMB Employees Union, said bus captains will check seats more frequently as requested by the company. Half of the 4,000 buses in the KMB fleet are installed with security cameras. Over the past 2 days, needles have been found sticking out of the seats on at least 3 KMB buses, leaving 2 passengers hurt. The Sha Tin Regional Crime Unit is looking into the case. KMB says it's highly concerned about reports of needles and has already passed closed-circuit television footage from the buses to the police. Christy Lung, TVB News.
Police are saying they will take resolute actions to maintain public order. That's after an officer was asked about participants joining the July 1st rally from outside Victoria Park. The area outside Sogo Department Store by East Point Road will be closed off during the rally. Police say they will take action if participants insist on joining from that location. They didn't say if that includes arresting protesters. The rally starts at 3 p.m. from Victoria Park, and petitioners plan to march to the central government offices.
Law enforcement seized $35 million worth of smuggled goods near Cheng Chau last night. That's the highest value of goods rounded up at sea in 5 years' time. Seahorses were found in 96 boxes of goods. Officers found the material on 2 vessels in an anti-smuggling operation last night. Other items included electronics, mobile phones, and cosmetics. Customs and police acted upon intelligence received back in March. Last night, they intercepted 2 vessels and arrested 3 Chinese men aged between 34 and 68.
On the resort island of Bali, a local volcano has been spewing ash and smoke. It's forced the closure of the airport for much of the day, stranding tens of thousands of tourists. Peter Coveas has details.
After sitting dormant for months, Mount Agong once again became active, sending ash more than 2,500 meters into the air. That meant the skies above Bali were filled with smoke, not planes. It's unsafe to fly when there is volcanic activity. The ash in the air can wreak havoc on jet engines. After carefully monitoring the situation, the region's disaster response agency reopened the airport this afternoon. The decision came after a change in winds shifted the toxic smoke. But not before more than 300 flights were cancelled, and while the volcano was spewing, travelers were fuming.
I was very upset when I got to the airport and it was closed. We're stuck sitting on the ground for 24 hours and don't have any more accommodation. And bit stuck here, really. I am a bit angry.
I have to fly back to Australia and then back to Germany, and I'm not gonna make it in time.
So for now, planes and tourists alike can now rest easier knowing the volcanic activity has subsided. Peter Corveos, TVB News.
A UK Committee of Parliament has concluded that it's beyond doubt that British intelligence agencies knew the U.S. was mistreating people detained after the September 11th terror attacks. A report by the Parliamentary Intelligence and Security Committee has found Britain knew of the mistreatment at an early stage. It also revealed more could have been done by authorities to influence American behavior. The committee also said British authorities didn't want to risk losing access to vital intelligence during efforts at the time to prevent another attack. From all of us, have a great weekend, everyone.
Good night.